Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The elevator doors slid open with a soft whoosh, and Maria stepped inside, her heart racing in her chest. She adjusted the strap of her worn-out handbag, pulling it tighter against her side as if to reassure herself. The heavy scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air. It was the kind of fragrance that was subtle yet pervasive, the kind that only the rich could afford. There were 4 women inside the elevator, standing close together. They looked the way Maria had imagined women like them would look, elegant, polished, and flawless. High heels clicked against the floor, their designer bags resting effortlessly in their hands. The fabrics of their dresses seemed to shimmer as they moved, a display of wealth Maria could only dream of. The moment she stepped inside, the conversation halted. The air grew thick with unspoken judgment, and Maria felt the weight of their eyes on her. She tried to avoid making eye contact, staring instead at the elevator's polished brass floor. She could hear them whispering, their voices low but cutting. "What is she doing here?" one of them muttered, barely a whisper, but it was loud enough for Maria to hear. Did she even notice what floor she pressed? Another voice, mocking, clearly disgusted. Maria bit her lip. She didn't belong here. She knew that. This wasn't her world. This was the world of the rich, the elite. And she, well, she was just a simple woman who had spent most of her life working multiple jobs to survive. A woman who had learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. But today, she couldn't do that. She couldn't let them see her shrink away. Not when she was so close. She stepped to the back of the elevator, trying to blend in with the polished wood walls, but her presence was like a spotlight in the room. It seemed like the women grew even quieter, staring her down with a kind of disdain that cut deeper than she cared to admit. Maria swallowed hard, pressing the button for the top floor. It was her destination, the place where she was going to meet someone who could change her life, if she could get past the barriers that separated her from the world of the privileged. But even as the button lit up, she felt out of place. Everything about this elevator screamed wealth, the soft carpeting beneath her feet, the smooth metal railings, the mirrors reflecting her face, which suddenly seemed like an alien thing in this space. The elevator started moving, but instead of the comforting hum of machinery, the sound seemed to echo louder in the small, confined space. It felt like time was stretching, the air heavier with each passing second. The women continued to glance at her, speaking in hushed tones. It felt like they were speaking just loud enough for her to hear. Their eyes flicked over her faded dress, her old shoes, and her unpolished nails. She had never been one for fashion. She had no time for it. And yet, she couldn't help but feel small. Small in front of them, small in front of everything she had worked for. She wasn't a part of this world, not even close. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She didn't have time for insecurities. She didn't have the luxury of self-doubt. She was here for a reason. The elevator jolted, pulling her back from her thoughts. A sharp, unexpected lurch made her grip the railing, steadying herself. The women's conversation ceased once more. It wasn't normal. Not this kind of movement. The elevator jerked again, a stutter that made the air feel dense and oppressive. Maria's stomach turned. The women exchanged glances, but no one said anything. Their silent fear was palpable, and it made Maria's pulse race. "Is something wrong?" one of the women asked in a low voice. Her lips barely moved as she spoke, but the fear in her voice was unmistakable. "I think we're stuck," another woman replied. "I didn't press anything." There was a moment of silence before one of the women in the corner tapped the button frantically. "We should be there by now," she muttered, her face pale. Maria swallowed hard. She had no idea what was happening, but she could feel the tension in the air thickening. The elevator had stopped moving completely. And for a long, painful moment, there was nothing but the sound of the women's shallow breathing. Then, as if it was a strange twist of fate, the elevator doors opened. Maria blinked, almost in disbelief. She hadn't heard a ding, no signal that they had reached the next floor, but the doors had opened anyway. The soft glow of fluorescent lights from outside flooded in, but it wasn't the familiar corporate office space she had expected. It wasn't the top floor either. Instead, she saw a hallway, dark, quiet, and completely unfamiliar. She froze. The women gasped, staring into the dimly lit corridor, their faces pale with confusion. The hallway stretched ahead, but it was like something out of a different world, a world where the rules didn't apply. The walls were cracked and peeling, the ceiling low and uneven. The floor beneath their feet was no longer the polished marble they were used to, it was worn, cracked concrete, like an abandoned building. "What's going on?" one woman whispered, her voice laced with panic. Maria couldn't answer. Her heart was racing too fast. What was happening? Where were they? A figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, with an air of command that made the women shrink back. His face was half-lit by the dim light, but Maria could see enough to recognize him. Her breath caught in her throat. It was him. The man from the past. The man she had never forgotten, though she had tried. He was standing there, watching them with a strange, unsettling smile on his face. His eyes locked with hers, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to stop. Time stood still as Maria's mind raced to process the impossible. How could he be here? He had disappeared years ago, gone without a trace. She had told herself she would never see him again. And yet, there he was, standing in front of her, as though nothing had ever changed. "Maria," he said, his voice low, smooth, and chillingly familiar. Maria's heart stopped for a beat. She felt the walls close in around her. What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The women in the elevator were staring at him now, wide-eyed, completely stunned by his sudden appearance. But his gaze never left Maria. He stepped forward, his presence filling the space. "You don't recognize me?" His tone was light, almost playful, but there was something dark lurking beneath it. Maria swallowed hard. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, but there was something about him, something she couldn't place, that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She didn't recognize him, but the way his voice carried that familiar rhythm. The way his eyes held a knowing glint. It was like a part of her was desperately reaching out to remember, to recognize, but it was slipping away from her like sand through her fingers. The elevator doors were still open, but no one moved. The women were now looking back and forth between the man and Maria, their confusion matching her own. "What do you want from me?" Maria managed, her voice barely a whisper. The man smiled, but this time it was not reassuring. It was cold, calculating. "You don't know yet, do you?" Before Maria could respond, the elevator doors slid shut with a sudden, harsh sound. The women gasped, and the lights flickered again. The man's voice came again, as if from behind the steel doors. "You're here because it's time to remember, Maria. Time to remember everything." And then, with the flicker of the lights, the world outside disappeared. The elevator was no longer in the same building. It was somewhere else, somewhere dark, where nothing seemed to make sense. Maria's pulse quickened, her hands clammy. She looked at the others, their faces a mirror of her own fear. What was happening? Where were they? And then the man's words echoed in her mind again, time to remember everything. A memory tugged at her, distant and elusive. But she couldn't grasp it. Not yet. Maria's heart thudded in her chest, the only sound she could hear in the oppressive silence of the elevator. The lights flickered once more, casting a strange, erratic glow over the four women. The cold metal walls felt like they were closing in, and the air, thick with fear, made it hard to breathe. Maria tried to steady herself, her palms sweating as she clutched the metal railing. The man's words lingered in her mind, his voice carrying an ominous undertone. Time to remember everything. The elevator was still. The women remained frozen, their eyes wide with fear. Maria could barely process what had just happened. Her mind raced as she thought back to the moment. He appeared, standing in that dark hallway. She should have known something was wrong. She should have turned back, but it was too late. There was no turning back now. One of the women broke the silence, her voice barely audible. What just happened? What is going on? Maria wanted to answer, to say something, anything, but her mouth felt dry, as if words had been stolen from her. She opened her mouth to speak but quickly shut it again. The overwhelming confusion and the sheer intensity of the moment had left her speechless. The woman who had spoken before, the one who had been so calm in the face of everything, now seemed to tremble. Her lips were pressed tight, her posture stiff. Her eyes darted between the others as if searching for an explanation. It was clear she didn't have one either. Is he gone?" another woman whispered. She stared at the closed elevator doors as though expecting him to reappear at any moment. But there was only silence. Maria leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. The elevator was still moving, still ascending slowly, but it felt like they weren't going anywhere. The walls seemed to distort, the elevator never reaching its destination, as though they were suspended in time. Was she dreaming? Had she lost her mind? Another flicker of light broke her thoughts. The door opened again. This time, it wasn't a hallway. The world outside was even stranger. It looked like a vast, empty, sterile space, a warehouse with high ceilings and dim lighting. She couldn't see the end of it. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating, but the reality of it all hit her in waves. She wasn't alone. There were people in the distance, figures moving like shadows. They weren't close, but the eerie stillness of the place made their presence all the more unsettling. Maria couldn't stop herself from stepping forward, her curiosity driving her, even though she knew she should run in the opposite direction. There was something in her gut that told her not to trust this place. Something told her that this wasn't just an ordinary situation. There was something much darker at play here. The women behind her murmured in confusion and fear, their voices trembling as they too looked out into the space beyond. None of them moved at first. They all stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do. Maria's legs were unsteady as she stepped cautiously outside the elevator. The cool air in the warehouse felt like a shock to her skin, a strange contrast to the warm, suffocating atmosphere of the elevator. The floors creaked beneath her shoes, the sound echoing through the vast space. Her breath quickened as her mind tried to process what was happening. Where were they? What was going on? She could hear the others slowly follow her, their footsteps hesitant. One of them spoke, her voice faint, like it was coming from far away. "We need to get out of here. This isn't right." But Maria couldn't stop herself from looking around. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the long, empty aisles and the faint sound of something moving deeper within the darkness. There was a door at the far end, barely visible in the low light. "Where are we?" Maria whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "I don't know," the woman behind her replied. "But this is not normal. We need to get out." But Maria couldn't bring herself to move, her feet rooted to the ground. It felt like something was drawing her in. A force. A pull. She couldn't explain it, but the urge to walk forward, to go toward the dark, empty room, was overwhelming. "Maria," one of the women called softly, concern in her voice. "Maria, what's happening?" The man's voice echoed in her mind again. Time to remember everything. Everything. The word had a weight to it, like a burden pressing against her chest. What did he mean? What was she supposed to remember? Who was he? And why was he so certain she had forgotten something? A wave of dizziness hit her. She stumbled but caught herself against the wall of the warehouse. The other women rushed to her side, but Maria waved them away. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice didn't sound convincing. But no one said anything more. They just watched her, unsure of how to help. They were all just as lost as she was. Maria slowly straightened up, taking another deep breath. She needed to focus. She needed answers. There was a sudden noise, a low hum, and then, to Maria's horror, a faint blue light flickered to life on the far wall. The light grew brighter, almost like a beacon. And then, as if summoned by the light, something moved out of the shadows. Maria's pulse quickened. It was him again. The man from the elevator. He stepped into the dim light, his figure towering over her. His face was still half shrouded in darkness, but she could see the cruel smile that twisted his lips. The smile that had haunted her dreams. The smile that made her skin crawl. "You came," he said, his voice smooth, as if nothing were amiss. As if this were all normal. Maria's heart raced, her thoughts scattered. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice trembling. His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Only cold, calculated amusement. "You'll remember soon enough, Maria," he said softly. "You'll remember everything." She took a step back, her legs shaking beneath her. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice gaining strength. "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her, as if studying her. As if he were waiting for something. "Do you remember your father, Maria?" he asked, his words slow and deliberate. Her heart stopped for a second. The word father seemed like a foreign thing in her mind. She hadn't thought about her father in years. The memories of him were faded, like a blurry photograph she could barely recognize. He had died when she was just a child. But she hadn't forgotten the pain. She hadn't forgotten the emptiness that followed. Her throat tightened as the man's words echoed in her mind. "Do you remember, Maria? Do you remember your father?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what he was asking. "Why would you bring him up?" she whispered, almost to herself. The man's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Then he stepped closer, his presence towering over her like an invisible force. "You'll find out soon enough," he said cryptically, before turning to the others in the room. "All of you will." Maria's breath hitched. She wasn't the only one affected by this. The others seemed equally confused, and yet, they didn't question his presence. It was like they were in a trance, waiting for something, anything, to make sense of the madness that had unfolded before them. But the man's next words sent a chill down Maria's spine. "Maria," he said, locking eyes with her. "You'll find your answers in the next room." Before she could respond, he was gone. Vanished into the shadows. The hum of the strange blue light continued, pulling her toward it. Maria took a deep breath. She had no choice. She had to find out what was going on. The answers were waiting in the next room. And she couldn't turn back now. Maria's footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space, her heart pounding with each uncertain step she took toward the glowing blue light. The chill in the air made her skin crawl as if something invisible were brushing against her. She paused, staring at the doorway in front of her. Her hands trembled at her sides, her mind racing. Was she really ready for whatever lay beyond that door? The man's cryptic words still rang in her ears. "You'll find your answers in the next room." But what answers? The mystery seemed to grow thicker with every passing second. The man's ominous presence, his haunting smile, his insistence on her remembering something. What did it all mean? Maria looked back toward the women, who had gathered near the elevator, hesitating at the threshold. The tension between them was palpable. None of them spoke. Each woman appeared lost in her own thoughts, their faces a mixture of fear, confusion, and disbelief. But Maria felt an overwhelming pull to move forward. The answers, the truth she needed to understand, were somewhere in that room. Her breath came in short bursts, her legs feeling like lead with every step. She reached the door, her hand hovering just above the cold metal handle, hesitant. She glanced over her shoulder. The other women were still there, standing like statues, as though waiting for something to happen. They, too, seemed drawn to the light but unable to take that final step. A deep breath. She twisted the handle and pushed the door open. The room beyond was darker than the hallway. The only source of light came from the fluorescent bulbs mounted high above, casting an eerie glow on the cement floor. It was a vast space, larger than the warehouse she had walked through earlier, stretching out as far as she could see. Shelves lined the walls, but unlike the empty storage rooms she had passed before, these shelves were filled with things. Objects she couldn't recognize at first. Strange, twisted things that seemed out of place. Maria stepped inside, her footsteps making no sound as she crossed the threshold. The air was thick, heavy with a strange scent she couldn't place. Her eyes darted across the room, trying to take in every detail, every corner. What kind of place was this? The lights flickered again, and for a moment, she thought she saw something in the shadows. Her breath caught in her throat, but when she blinked, it was gone. She pushed forward, her resolve hardening. There had to be something here that would explain everything. Her hand brushed against one of the shelves, and she recoiled slightly at the strange texture of what was stored there. She couldn't tell if they were sculptures, old relics, or something far more sinister. A low hum started again, filling the room. The sound seemed to come from everywhere, vibrating through the walls and into her chest. It was almost mechanical. Like some unseen force was powering the room. She could feel it, deep in her bones. Maria. The voice was low, familiar, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it wasn't the man from the elevator. No, this voice was different. It felt closer. She froze. Her blood ran cold. That voice, she knew it. Her heart stopped. She felt like she was falling, sinking into the darkened space. Maria. It was her father's voice. Her mind spun as memories, long buried and forgotten, came flooding back. She saw the face of the man who had once been her whole world, her protector, her provider. But he was gone now. Had been for years. How could this be possible? How could she be hearing his voice again? Dad? The word came out as a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the room. Her voice shook, tears threatening to break free. She hadn't thought about him in so long, not like this. Not with such raw, aching need. The voice responded, soft but steady, from the shadows that now seemed to deepen around her. It's time to remember, Maria. To understand who you really are. Her breath caught in her throat. Was this some kind of trick? Was this man playing with her mind? Or was it something else? Before she could speak again, the hum intensified, shaking the room like a sudden tremor. The floor beneath her feet vibrated. She stumbled, her hand slamming into one of the shelves for support. The sound of something heavy shifting in the corner of the room sent her heart into overdrive. She couldn't take her eyes off the shadows, where she swore she saw something move. And then, the silence returned. The hum had stopped, as if it had never been there. Maria, her father's voice came again, now louder, clearer. Do you remember? Do you remember why you're here? Maria's throat went dry. She didn't know what to say. Her mind was spinning, trying to piece together what was happening, trying to make sense of it all. I don't, she began, but the rest of her sentence died on her lips. Her father's voice cut through the air again, more urgent now. You've been chosen, Maria. You and the others. It's all been leading up to this. The truth, the answers, are here. But you must remember everything. The room around her seemed to fade as the voice filled her mind. She couldn't breathe. The weight of his words was suffocating. Chosen? What did that even mean? How could she be part of something bigger than herself, something so extraordinary? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you prepare me? She cried out, her voice breaking under the pressure of her emotions. She stumbled backward, hitting the wall, her hands grasping at the air as though she could find some stability, some sense of control. The man's voice echoed again, but this time it wasn't coming from the shadows. It was all around her. You weren't ready, Maria. But now you are. You've come to understand. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor. A flood of emotions overwhelmed her, fear, confusion, anger, and disbelief. What was happening? Why couldn't she understand? Her father had died. He couldn't be speaking to her now. It didn't make sense. Maria, the voice whispered once more. Everything you've ever known is a lie. Your life, your family, it's all been part of something much bigger. Her mind whirled as her body began to shake. She could feel it, the walls closing in, the air thick with unspoken truths. The enormity of it all was too much. It was all too much. Suddenly, a figure stepped out of the shadows. A figure she recognized instantly, and yet, it was impossible. It was her father. Her breath stopped in her chest. She wanted to scream, but the air was too thick to move. The figure stepped forward, his face as real as it had been when he was alive, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. The man smiled, his eyes warm, but there was something else in his gaze, a warning, a sorrow. "It's time, Maria. You've been waiting for this moment, even if you didn't know it." Her heart pounded as she stood up shakily. "Why are you here? How are you here? You're dead. You." His hand raised, cutting her words short. "You will understand soon enough. But you need to be ready. You need to know the truth." The lights flickered again, and suddenly, everything shifted. The room, the shadows, her father's figure, all began to warp, to distort. The air thickened. The temperature dropped. She felt a sharp pain in her chest, as though her heart were being squeezed. Her vision blurred. "Maria." Her father's voice screamed, now desperate. "You have to." But the world went black. Maria's world was silent. The blackness around her was so complete it felt like she was suffocating, like the very air had vanished. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think. She tried to call out, but no sound came from her mouth. It was as though she had been swallowed by the very shadows that had once surrounded her father. And then, without warning, the silence shattered. A sharp, blinding light cut through the darkness, forcing her eyes open, and she gasped, lungs burning as if she had been starved for air. She took a deep breath, her chest heaving, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Where was she? She was lying on the cold, hard floor again. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, disoriented. Her fingers brushed against a smooth, metallic surface. The room had changed, completely different from the warehouse-like place she had been just moments ago. Now, she was inside some kind of dimly lit corridor, the walls pulsating with faint blue light. She stood up shakily, her knees weak. She couldn't understand what was going on. What had just happened? Was it a dream? Had everything up until now been some elaborate hallucination? No. She knew it wasn't. The feeling in her chest, the pounding heartbeat, the weight of the words her father had spoken, they were too real. "Maria." The voice came again, cutting through the air like a razor. The voice she had come to dread, the voice she couldn't escape. Her father's voice. She spun around, her heart slamming against her ribs. The air around her seemed to tighten, as if something invisible was forcing her into a corner. But there was no one there. The corridor was empty. And yet, his voice lingered in her ears, echoing off the walls. "Maria," the voice repeated, now closer. "You have to understand. It's all part of the plan." Her pulse quickened. Her mind raced. Plan? What plan? She wanted to scream, but the words caught in her throat. She was so close to losing it, to breaking under the weight of the impossible situation. "Where are you?" she called, her voice shaking. "What's happening? Why are you doing this to me?" She took a few unsteady steps forward, each one echoing loudly in the quiet corridor. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get out, but she didn't know where to go. There was nowhere to hide from the voice, from the strange force that seemed to be pulling her deeper into this nightmare. "It's a lie, Maria. All of it. It's a test. You have to wake up." The voice seemed to grow stronger, louder, until it was deafening. It surrounded her, pressing in on all sides, as though she were trapped in a room full of ghosts. "No," she whispered, her mind spinning. "This can't be real. I don't." Suddenly, the walls of the corridor shifted. The lights dimmed, flickering. And then, just like that, the space before her opened up into a vast room. A room that seemed far too large to be contained in the building she had seen earlier. A room that shouldn't even exist. There, in the center of the room, was a large, circular table. At least a dozen people sat around it, their faces obscured by shadows. But Maria knew who they were. She didn't need to see their faces clearly. She knew them by the way they sat, by their presence, by the air of authority they carried. They were the women from the elevator. The same women who had looked down on her, who had mocked her for being ordinary, who had ridiculed her for being nothing like them. Now they sat in silence, their eyes fixed on Maria. But there was one more person at the table. A man. He sat at the head of the table, his back straight, his face unreadable. Maria's heart skipped a beat. It was him. The man she had seen before, the one who had spoken to her in the elevator. He wasn't just a random stranger. He was something else, something more. "Maria," his voice was cold, calculated. "You've come far. But you still don't understand." "Not fully." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice breaking as she stood, feeling exposed, vulnerable in front of the people who had turned her life upside down. "You've always been part of this," the man said. "You just didn't know it. You didn't remember." Maria's chest tightened. "Part of what? I don't even know who you are. I don't know what's happening." The man leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "You're part of a long-running project. A project that's been in motion for years. You've been trained, guided, since you were a child, Maria. Everything about your life has led you here." Maria's heart pounded so loudly in her ears that it drowned out everything else. Guided? Trained? What was he talking about? I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm just a regular woman. I don't belong here with you people. I don't know anything about this. I don't know who any of you are." "You are more than just a regular woman," he replied, his voice firm, his eyes unwavering. "You've been chosen, Maria. Chosen for this moment. Chosen to be part of something much bigger than you can comprehend." His words hung in the air like an unspoken truth, a truth that Maria couldn't grasp. She felt like she was floating in a void, her sense of reality slipping further and further away. "You were raised for this," the man continued. Your entire life was a preparation. Your father was the first to see your potential. He guided you, shaped you. You were meant to join us, to be a part of what we are building. Maria's mind was reeling. Her father shaped her? She couldn't process the words. The man was speaking as if her life had been planned for her, as if everything she had done, every step she had taken, had been part of some grand design she had never known about. No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. This can't be true. You're lying. The man's gaze softened, but only for a moment. Then, he looked at her with something akin to pity. It's not about belief, Maria. It's about what you are. What you were always meant to be. The room seemed to close in around her, the air thick with tension. Maria's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to her knees. Her hands shook violently, her mind unable to accept what she was hearing. The women at the table remained silent, their eyes cold and emotionless. They didn't need to speak. They already knew the truth. The man stood up slowly, walking toward her. The truth is in your blood, Maria. You carry the legacy of those who have come before you. But only you can decide what to do with it. The weight of his words pressed down on her chest, suffocating her. She felt trapped, cornered by forces she couldn't comprehend, by a past she hadn't known she had. Make your choice, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. You can walk away. Or you can accept your place. You can be part of what we are building, or you can stay where you are, hiding from the truth. Maria's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Nothing made sense. Nothing felt real. The man waited, his eyes never leaving hers, as though he knew she was at a breaking point, as though he knew this was the moment that would define everything. And then, before she could speak, a voice interrupted. A familiar voice. Maria. It was her father's voice again, clear as day, cutting through the room like a knife. Maria looked up, her heart racing. There, standing in the doorway, was her father. The real one. Her father stepped forward, his face kind and reassuring, just as she remembered. You know the truth now, Maria, he said softly, his eyes filled with love. You've always known. It's time to stop running. Time to accept who you are. Maria's heart stopped. The confusion, the pain, everything crashed into her at once. Her eyes darted between her father and the man standing at the head of the table. The truth was clear now. But what would she do with it? What was she truly meant to become?